Well, hello everybody, this is Tim Green with Rattle Magazine. Welcome to another critique of the week. Thanks so much for joining me. It's July 19th, another fun Friday afternoon here. Great way to end the regular work week, although the work really never ends at Rattle. I do work 7 days a week, but it does feel a little special when it's a Friday, and we help kick that off with a critique of the week. Now, as always, if you'd like to submit your poems for critique, we're not just pulling poems out of the air as regular submissions and then exposing them to the world in critique. That's not how it works. Don't worry if you're new to this. What we do is there's a submission category on Submittable. So if you go to rattle.com/critique, you'll see the category there, or if you just go to Rattle Submittable page, you'll see the category. Send 2 poems if you'd like us to review them. We'll talk about what works, what doesn't, how the poem functions, where we might go with it. All that kind of stuff. We're trying to be as productive and helpful as possible. We started doing this over 6 years ago now because people always ask for feedback on their submissions, and I just don't have time to give feedback on submissions. But if we do it publicly, then everybody can learn from the whole process, and it's not just like a one-on-one thing, which is great, but not the most efficient as possible, and you don't have a big organization like Rattle run with so few people helping out by being inefficient. So we do this critique of the week live so everybody can learn. And we always have a great crew on hand. This week we've got Dr. Q's here, Steve Farrell. We've got Winston Munn. Nancy Tennell's here. We got Patty Arbor. That's a new name to me, I think. Liska is here. Mark Fishbein, who we'll see soon coming up with some poems. We've got... Let's see, Nate Jacobs here. Gary Rawson is here. Sandra Fees, Morgan Feeney, D. Coleman, Maria Berg, Tom Barlow's here. Rebecca Kate, Rachal Valenzuela, who we'll see in a little bit too. Jamie Thomas is here. Amy Dower Solorzano is here. Who else? Dick Westheimer. Hey, Dick. Mark Grenier. Nancy Sabanek. It's tough getting through all the names at this point. MXTXC, good to see you. Katie Dozier downstairs. We got Maria Alberg, I think I said that. Brian O'Sullivan's here. Barb Kreisting, Lisa Seidenberg. We got Rose. Sharon Ferrante's here. Hemet Malik is here. Holly Elliott, Clayton Clark, Jamal Uden. Yeah, so great group over on YouTube. Linda McCrary Bowerman. Hello from Australia. Good to see you. Yeah. And over on Facebook, Facebook's dwindles, but Nate Jacob is there, wondering if anybody else will join him over on Facebook. Facebook usually used to tell people that the streams were going on. Now they really don't, even if you sign up, so there aren't many people. But, it's a way to catch new visitors, so we'll keep doing that. The same thing with X. I don't really watch X. But anyway... if you have any comments, please share as many of your thoughts as you can. This is supposed to be as helpful as possible to the poets, so leave comments, especially on YouTube in the chat windows. I'll pass along as many as I can, but the poet can watch later, look back and see what people said and learn a lot. So the whole point is to learn a whole bunch. And Hemet, sorry for saying your name wrong for so long. I just assumed because no one corrected me that I was saying it all right, but good to know the right way, Hemet. All right, now let's dive into... the first poet, and Mark Fishbane, I wonder if I'm saying that right, Fishbane, I'd say, is coming up first. And Mark has a poem in, if I remember right, it's the Musician's Tribute, right? In the fall issue that's coming out. And he has, that's an interesting view. That's down at my computer. We want the file view. That's what we want. There we go. There's Mark's poems. So Mark Fishbane, he has a poem in the fall issue, like I said. I believe it is in the Musician's Tribute. I have to check back which one of those, but it's nice to see Mark here. I thought we'd pull his up. And the next poet is Rachal Valenzuela, too, who we have here as a regular contributor lately. So I always, if I recognize your name because you're participating and involved with stuff that we do, I pull you up to the top. We kind of alternate every other week. We'll do people that I recognize and that submitted recently, or we'll just go to the back of the queue. And this is one of those, let's see what people who participate are doing. So here's Mark's first poem. This is Ode to the Dead in the Holy Land. And it's nice to know how long the poem is going to be ahead of time. So there you go. It's about that length. Ode to the Dead in the Holy Land. Time does not heal. It leaves scars stitched to the body, reminding us of past degradations. To heal is to accept without regret our evil rages of revenge. To heal is to seek communion with your enemy. Time does not heal. It only changes bandages, waiting for scabs to peel away the chronic despair of forgetfulness. I am wounded inside, tranquilized, lying on a hard bed of lament. Time wears a mask that does not heal. Nothing could undo what my enemy has done, nor undo what I do to my enemy, until time rips off its mask to wail. So there you go. That is the first poem of two we'll look at from Mark. This is an ode to the dead in the Holy Land. And then starting off, the title is nice because we get situated. We kind of know what's going on in the poem. We're not lost. Imagine if the title wasn't this, if the title was like Time, right? And then we say time doesn't heal, blah, blah, blah. We don't get any help. So it's nice to have some kind of introduction where you know what's going on in the poem. We get that here. So we're talking about an ode to the dead in the Holy Land, very straightforward. In an ode, I always get the difference between odes and eulogies and elegies. What is it? An ode is a lyric poem addressed to a particular subject, often elevated in style or manner, blah, blah. So, so that's not for the... So it's like an elegy. I always get those three confused. It's like an elegy, but you don't have to be dead yet, even though it's dead. So it could be a eulogy too. But this is an ode to the dead in the Holy Land, so we know what we're talking about. Time does not heal. So a nice short declarative statement to start out. And I'm in the poem. Time does not heal. There's a forcefulness to the voice that works. It leaves scars stitched to the body, reminding us of past degradations. And now, so here, by this point, I'm starting to get a little... I feel myself, like I have this sense a lot of times reading poems. Imagine if you're like on a shipwreck, like the Titanic is just sunk, right? And you're thrown into the water, and you're reaching around for something to grab onto. Already at this point in the poem for me, I'm like trying to find some kind of like hunk of wood or a door to pull myself up on and hold so I don't have to swim, you know? There's that feeling of like, what can I grab onto? What kind of concrete imagistic thing? What can I feel? Like, how can I help enter the space of this poem? And in the first stanza, we don't have that yet. So we have an abstraction about time healing, and then it leaves scars stitched to the body. So we can see some scars. But where is the body and what's it doing? Reminding us of past degradations. And then past degradations is a very abstract concept, as abstract as time not healing. So we're still not grounded in this poem yet. We don't have a kind of life raft or what do they call those things? Where you throw the ring, the little circle, the life, I don't know, the little circle-y thing. We don't have one of those yet either. We're still waiting for that. To heal is to accept without regret our evil rages of revenge. So evil rages of revenge has a nice sound to it, but again, it's a really big abstraction, and so we're still not having a sense of like the space that's being created. And I don't mean like you have to have a visual space. Like it's not a movie that you're necessarily painting. I mean, fiction almost always paints a movie, but we want to have a space where the speaker exists and a sense of who the speaker is speaking to. And just what's going on. And we still don't really have that. Even though we know what it is, there's still nothing to hold on to. Like think about if you've ever seen a play of Waiting for Godot, all they need is that coat hanger or coat tree that like stands in for a real tree. And that's like one thing, like one little item, one little element to make the stage, to sort of trigger your imagination so you can imagine that they're waiting, on a bench in a park or whatever. And that's all you need. But you need one thing. If they were just sitting there on the stage, you'd be really lost. You know what I mean? And you need something like that. And we still don't have that. We have like abstractions and disembodied images, but we don't have any kind of sense of who is speaking and where we are with relation to it. And so it's not that you can't do a poem like that. It's just really hard to connect. And so we're lost in a lot of abstraction. We're kind of swimming in that sea. And we go back to time does not heal, so this becomes a kind of refrain. It only changes bandages, waiting for scabs to peel away the chronic despair of forgetfulness. Now, we have the bandages, we have the scars. So there's this disembodied sense of some kind of healing thing, but we don't have anywhere to put it. Imagine how much more powerful that would be if we could see it embodied in like a hospital room or something like that, or on the side of the road, or in like a rubble, like waiting, hopefully somebody will find you. Anything like that where we can imagine where these scars and these bandages are would make it so much more of a connection. but we're ungrounded in the poem. So we don't have that emotional, it's like you need a cord attached to somebody for the electricity to go through or something, for that emotional spark to go through. We don't have that yet. Okay. I'm wounded inside, tranquilized, lying on a hard bed of lament. And again, so there's nice phrases here. So the chronic despair of forgetfulness is a nice phrase. And again, too, and I liked the evil ravages of revenge. That sounds nice. And the hard bed of lament is a nice image, too. But again, it's disembodied. So they're sort of floating around in space, and we don't get to connect with them. Nothing can undo what my enemy has done, nor undo what I do to my enemy, until time rips off its mask to wail. And then, so time ripping off its mask is an interesting thing. So what you have this sort of scene that's so disembodied, where there's wounds, there's bandages, there's scars, and then the mask, time is ripping off its mask. And that's something that that's a metaphor that you could really push out. Like, what would it look like underneath the mask? What is the mask? It's really ripe. That concept is really ripe for extended metaphor and ways you could push that into a deeper poem. But that's where the poem ends. So we're sort of left with a suggestion of where the poem could go. But to me, the poem sort of spins in abstraction and doesn't really connect because it doesn't have that concrete thing that's pushing off again. So anyway, that is my thought. So my thought is the poem really starts here, and a lot of this is sort of preamble that we could set up into some kind of extended metaphor type poem where time is ripping off its mask, and that lets you, through symbolic language and metaphor, explore what you mean. Like, what do you really mean by time rips off its mask? That's a really interesting concept, and there's a lot to untangle there, and we can untangle it by making that a metaphor and seeing where it goes. But to me, this is the start of the poem. So that's a long discussion of that, and we'll see what everyone else is saying. Yeah. So like Amy Dower Solorzano says, I enjoy the play on the old adage, time heals all wounds, but the scars, wounds, and scabs sound very melodramatic without grounding us in an image or anecdote. Yeah. Yeah. Oh, and I meant to say, yeah, so Bard Christing is pointing this out. I forgot to go back. I think it's just a typo, which happens, If we have a submission, even the Rattle Poetry Prize winners have had typos in there, and it's obvious typos happen. There's a way that we actually read where we project out what we expect before we actually see it. And so you sort of project what's supposed to be there and see what's supposed to be there without actually seeing what's there. That's just how reading works. And so it's really hard to proofread your own stuff. And a lot of times what it is, when there's a typo, it's that you change the line around and change the syntax, but then you don't see the new way that it's supposed to be. And so you end up missing a typo. And typos happen, It's just, who cares? We just fill it in. We correct it. We make sure that was right and move on with our day. So don't worry about typos, but that does seem like an obvious typo. Let's see. Yeah. Dr. Q says, is the first line, time does not heal, the anti-cliche? And yeah, I think it's fun to take a cliche and turn it on its head and play with what it would mean if it were the opposite. Because so many things are the opposite too. Things are much more complicated than cliches. Yeah. And so I think that was the spark of the poem that started it out. Like the phrase time heals all wounds, but then time does not heal. Let's see. Nancy Tennell is wondering about the changing the order of the stanzas. So she's saying, what if the third stanza becomes the second? So we read, time does not heal. It leaves scars stitched to the body, reminding us of past degradations. Time does not heal. It only changes bandages, waiting for the scabs to peel away the chronic despair of forgetfulness. I think that's a better intro. If we move that up, I think that stays with the theme that's going on in the poem and then lets us push forward a little more clearly. To me, what we want to do, if we started out this, and let me, I don't know why that resized. Okay. Yeah. Oh, it's a different font. I don't know how that happened. Anyway, So to me, imagine the poem starting there. Time does not heal. It leaves scars stitched to the body, reminding us of past degradations. Time does not heal. It only changes bandages, waiting for scabs to peel away the chronic despair of forgetfulness. He lies in the hospital bed, staring at the ceiling. Imagine that is an entryway into a scene. And then once we have a scene, we start to have a person, and we start to have a sense of character and empathy. And I think that's the kind of the direction to go, or move us through, having a narrator move us through scenes and narrating through. But having connection and not this abstraction is what makes poems start. Yeah, and this is we're talking sort of in more depth, but the cliched way to say it is just show don't tell, as Clayton Clark says. Love the concept and want to feel it more, and that's why we say show don't tell. Because showing, we get to enter, we get to connect with the characters, even if it's just the voice of the person giving a monologue. We connect with that person, even if we disagree with that person. It's not like a connection of agreement. It's a connection of there is another human here. Like, it's not like the same as like talking to the phone. That's why the AI stuff will never work. If we know it's AI, we won't care, because we know it's a freaking phone. We don't, and in the same way, if we know we're talking to an actual person, we're automatically interested because they have an entirely different perspective on the world, and it's fascinating. And so having that sense of connecting with the person, like you're actually having a conversation, is what lets you feel and lets you have emotions and be moved by the poem and remember it. So finding a way in this to not be abstract and to have a connection to somebody where it feels like someone actual is speaking to me. Let's see. Yeah. Bethany Jarwell says, I want a third Time Does Not Heal. And I think that works too. Cindy D says, time doesn't heal everything as he shows. And that's true too. So we want to push, that's the concept. We want to push into and find out, dig deeper and understand that on a more visceral level. Okay. So there's some ideas for what to do. I think that's where to go with the poem. It really starts out, to me, I want to know more about this mask. When Time rips off his mask. Why is Time wearing a mask? Who's Time trying to fool? And what is the mask made of? Why is the mask there? There's so many questions that last line leaves open that are worth kind of probing into. I think there's a lot of fun there. And I would dig into that concept and then find this whole beginning as a way to enter and get our interest and then explore that topic. That's what I would be doing in that poem. Gary Rustin says, one of the problems is that time does not heal, is repeated too much once or too little. Does not begin every stanza. And yeah, we talked to, this is a common thing, but the rule of 3 in art is very important because 3, we start to sense a pattern. We're actually, how our brains work, we're pattern recognition engines. We look for patterns everywhere. We adhere to our patterns, and that's kind of one of the problems that come up as we have these heuristics that don't often apply. But that's the way the brain works. We want to find patterns. And so when you see 2, you're wondering if that's a pattern, but you're waiting for the confirmation. You never get it. You never get that little extra dopamine. With a 3rd, you see the pattern, get the dopamine, and you're happy. And then it establishes something to push off against, which is why patterns are nice. You establish a pattern, then you push it against, so we're learning and tuning in to the pattern, and we love that. It's just one of those little, like, you toss a human a Rubik's Cube, and we like to fiddle with it. We like to fiddle with things like that. And so it keeps us engaged. Yeah. Dr. Q says the title and the last line have the most interest. The rest is lament. And I agree with that. I think the title and the last line are the most interesting things of this poem. Okay. So, yeah, and Nancy Semanek says the title is trying to do the heavy lifting. And yeah, that's true too. We want, and I wonder, yeah, I think that's a good thing to think about too. We talk about how much helpful the title can be very often, because a lot of times the poem has great language, is really interesting, but you're a little lost, and the title can help you guide your way. But it's better, it's better storytelling to have things revealed gradually too, and having the whole thing in the title sometimes isn't as strong. So So, it's better to not have to have a title. It's best to have a title that pushes you even deeper into the new direction. Like when we talk about Fishbein, how interesting it is to have, when you go back and read the title, it's a different way to look at it after you've read the rest of the Fishbein. That's one of the principles of making good Fishbein, and it's the same thing applies to all poems too. Okay, let's move on to the next poem. And next is a little longer. This is the first noble truth. And now we talk about this every time, but the reason why we ask for 2 poems is so we can see if there's the same tendencies that we have to work on, or it's just a one-off thing. Because sometimes we're experimenting with a poem. It's just, this time I was trying with this, that didn't work, or whatever. Other times it's like, this is a pattern that we have to keep, speaking of patterns, this is a pattern we have to keep working on, avoiding, certain little pitfalls. So we'll see if that's the case here, and enjoy this longer, interesting poem, The First Noble Truth. Excuse this honesty, you who are hearing this. I accept with nonchalance that all is suffering. If I appear to be suffering, it's pretending. In truth, I am not suffering at this very moment. I am in neutral, neither hungry nor horny, tired nor bored, brooding in envy. To be sure, there is a constant dull pain from humanity's daily mutilations. However, I prefer the now, more personal, comparing an apple to a pomme d'estere, or which déjà vu to sing at the Marche Funèbre. I don't know how to say those words. Anyway, I sympathize with contradictions, even about the purpose of faith or craving. I had my share while never having enough. Is this what I expect growing old? I get it. Suffering supersedes all things, the bloodshot visions from not too merciful gods who awkwardly created this unruly universe, seemingly without compassion. What hope of resurrection? Forgetting the fatigue of survival, the inevitable hungers we feed daily with sweet meats from our labors. Maybe you too have had hazy evenings with questions that can never be answered. I heard too many guesses from opportunists of the afterlife, those who sell tickets for the soul when it pops out of your shoes. Contentment is not enough. I should be ecstatic. I should feast with a voracious hunger of hope, feed at apples from the trees of tears. We are, after all, alive in the dharma of things. Life ends with loss, and loss begins grief. New what? Chant God is great, sing hallelujah. Putting that aside, let us conclude. Considering my current mood with its abundance of expectation, ending up on a hard bed in a strange town, meditating how emptiness must become a bliss, I'm fine until the next tragedy, which will remind me like a kitchen timer, sure as hell that suffering is a poison snake without an antidote. Yeah, so this has a lot more going for it, I'd say, in the poem. There's a lot more concreteness, and there's a feel of getting a monologue from somebody, which is a really, if the poem isn't going to, portray a scene where we're going to see like a stage emerging and we have this like portal into another universe where we can see everything, it's important to have a sense that the voice is being delivered from an actual tangible person in a kind of where the person is a character. If there's no characters emerging in the poem, the speaker has to be a character. I think that's a good way to think about it. And this has a lot more of that. And so, excuse this, and it's set up really nicely at the beginning. The first noble truth. So we know what it's going to be about, the first noble truth. And you might know that points to Buddhism, you might not, but and that first noble truth is that all is suffering, all is dukkha. And so that's pointing us where, but then we start out, excuse this honesty, you who are hearing this. So with that first line, where it's set up as a kind of monologue where we know kind of what's going on, because we know somebody is speaking this to us for a purpose. And that we are the ones listening to it. It's not like, an address to somebody else, somebody specific. It's addressed to us, the reader. So that sets that up. And so we have this sense of the monologue, which grounds us. I mean, often the grounding is some kind of concrete object and a scene that can emerge, but the grounding can be the voice, and I think that sets us up well. Hang on, let me get this so I can see both things at once. Okay, so that starts us out nicely. I accept with nonchalance that all is suffering. The first thing is, Well, anyway. If I appear to be suffering, it's pretending. In truth, I am not suffering at this very moment. I'm in neutral. Neither hungry nor horny, tired or bored, or brooding in envy. This is a nicely done list. So there's a nice sonic quality to this. Do you see? It's what we were sort of talking about before with the rule of three. You can see that playing out right here. Lists always have this kind of component where they're setting up your expectations, then shifting them. So we have the neither hungry or horny, tired or bored, and then we shift that. So we're expecting a this or that. Instead we get or brooding and envy. So it's a nice shift. That's a good play on that. And then the list ends. So it's a nice use. If you listen to the voice that's speaking and telling you to make a list that way, that's the way to have a musical poem, basically. That's the voice that tells you how to move things around and make it surprising in their music. So that's a nice list too. Yeah. So to be sure, there's a constant dull pain from humanity's daily mutilations. They're a little bit too... So we established this excuse dishonesty. And one of the things we want to do when we're having a voice like that is to... how often you need... There's a episode at some point, maybe like 3 months ago, and there's no way you can find it the way it's done. But we talked about George Bulgare's casual voice in the poem The Bicycle, or My Bicycle, or whatever that's called. I mean, it's called Bicycle. But the way that every once in a while he reminds you that he's speaking, and it's casual voice. So he occasionally throws in those asides. But we don't want to overdo it too. It's like every once in a while, in case you might forget, it's like, like you're keeping that balloon in the air. And every once in a while, you got to pop it back up to make sure it's still floating. But you don't want to hit the balloon too much because then it goes out of control and hits the ceiling or whatever. So here, I think, is a little bit, to be sure, it gets a little wordy, I guess is what I'm saying. When you have a lot of those asides that are reminding you that it's somebody addressing you, it's easy to go too far and then become too wordy. And I think this is an example of something I would cut. And I would just go right to there. There is a constant dull pain from humanity's daily mutilations. However, I prefer the now. So we get the however, too. There are a lot of these asides. We cut the one, but there are a lot of them that I think it's a little too much. Yeah. I don't want to go to... It's a long poem, so I want to go without reading the other comments, too. So Holly Elliott says the opening is, for me, could be pared down. Wouldn't the first 3 words serve for the first line separating speaker from listener? Yeah. Yeah, exactly. So this could be trimmed a lot too. So talking about trimming, where was it? The to be sure and the however, we could also trim this whole thing off. We want to get it more condensed. And one thing we're doing is taking up people's time. And we don't want to take up people's time too much. You want things to have a function always and not be distracting. Every word you add should add to the poem and not take away from the poem. Yeah. Mark Gunner says these are very ambitious poems, but tend to be a little overstated. Rose says pomme de terre, not terrace. I'm not sure. Is that apple? I thought palm was apple. Is that right? Apple of earth? Is that what that means? I don't speak French. Is that French? I don't even know. Oh, that's potato. Oh, okay. But potato is like an apple of the earth. That's interesting. Interesting. Okay. Let's see. Yeah. Yeah, James says why the veering into French. And it is, I wondered about that too. Because it doesn't continue throughout the poem. Let's see. Yeah. Well, I love that. I love that apple. The potato is an apple of the earth. That's cool. It is a delightful phrase, as Nancy Snell says. I didn't know that. Okay, anyway. Which déjà vu to sing at the March... I don't know this either. The March Funèbre. The March Funèbre. It's a funeral march. Okay. Kind of like what it sounds like it might be. I sympathize with contradictions, even about the purpose of faith or craving. I had my share while never having enough. Is this what I expected growing old? So I like this line here. To me, the people who are saying that this is too wordy in the beginning, I think that's the case. I think I would try to find a way to condense this down. I like the content. I like where it's trying to go. I like that it's addressing us with a complicated philosophical argument, really. But it does go on too long. And so what I would do is try to see what I really need and what I can pull out of this. I like this line a lot. I like the beginning there. I like the general concept, but can you cut this stanza in half? Okay. I get it. Suffering supersedes all things. The bloodshot visions from not too merciful gods who awkwardly created this unruly universe, seemingly without compassion. So there's a little bit of, and maybe, I mean, I haven't been very serious about Buddhism in a long time, but, Buddhism doesn't have gods that created the universe. So it feels a little bit like, the equivalent of mixed metaphors with talking about gods making the universe, but then talking about, Buddhists' view of the universe. It's not gods like that making us suffer. It's the fact that, we cling to the corporeal reality that we're thrust into that makes us suffer. Either worried about, losing something we have or not having what we need. And so either way, we end up suffering in the long run. And so that's a very different construct of that. And so it feels like mixing sort of religions in a way that isn't pushed forward. It's sort of just thrown out there. And then we get the other religions too, but without delving into that. So I'm a little confused about how to take all that aspect of it. What hope of resurrection, forgetful, the fatigue of survival, the inevitable hungers we feed daily with sweet meats from our labors. I like the sweet meats from our labors. There are a lot of nice little lines in this poem throughout. Maybe you too have had hazy evenings with questions that can never be answered. I like that line too. So I like these kind of things. I heard too many guesses from opportunists of the afterlife. Guesses? Those who sell tickets for the soul when it pops out of your shoes. It's an amusing image. The tickets, or those who sell tickets for the soul when it pops out of your shoes. That's nice. That's one of those ones that you could push farther and extend that because it's a fun, playful image. It's an opportunity. Contentment is not enough. I should be ecstatic. I should feast with voracious hunger of hope. Feeded apples from the tree of tears. And so again, the theology seems a little mixed up with this. It's not like it's there's a reason why contentment is the goal rather than being ecstatic, and that's because ecstatic eventually leads to suffering too, because you're worried about losing your ecstasy, and there's no way around that sort of conundrum. So I don't know. So the theology seems kind of mixed up to me a little bit in a way that I'm not really. If it was exploring that and pushing into that and trying to figure out answers to those paradoxes, it would work. But it's sort of leaving them there. I'd like a little more exploration too. We are, after all, alive in the dharma of things. Life ends with loss, and loss brings grief. New what? Is that French again? New what? Chant God is great. Sing hallelujah. So we could choose a God. I don't know. It's at this point, it's a little hard to follow. Just what I like the voice of the reader. I think there's interesting lines coming out, or the speaker, I should say. But I'm having trouble following the thought process. Putting that aside, let us conclude. So we're at the concluding. All right. Some people will choose God and sing hallelujahs instead of this. But putting that aside, let us conclude, considering my current mood, with its abundance of expectation. I like that, of the abundance, ending up on a hard bed in a strange town. Where is that hard bed in a strange town? I mean, that's a nice image, but I don't know where the speaker is or what that means. Meditating how emptiness must become a bliss. And so here, when you have a nice image like this, a hard bed in a strange town, that's one of the things you could do. Let us know what that bed in a strange town is. It can be a callback to something in the title or the early on in the poem. Like if this were called The First Noble Truth While Lying in Bed in Nice or something like that, then that would work. That would be a nice callback. But instead, it's sort of it appears out of nowhere, an actual concrete where the speaker is. And it just leaves you a little unsettled almost, or a little confused. It's a new thing to add into the arithmetic of what's going on in the poem that comes at the very end. But meditating on how emptiness must become bliss, I'm fine until the next tragedy, which will remind me, like a kitchen timer, sure as hell, that suffering is a poisoned snake without an antidote. So kind of a summarizey type title there. Well, anyway, those are my thoughts on this poem. To me, I want to condense this and dig deeper into the actual thoughts of it. Like I'm still having trouble following the train of thought, and I wanted a little more explanation. I'm interested and fascinated really by the poem. I'm on board with the speaker's voice, but can we explore it a little more deeply? Let me look back at the comments again. Yeah, Annie Blanchard said, I would have to have some time to sit down and also look some things up here, also meditate on it. But I do Buddhism, but I don't get some of the other non-Buddhist stuff. A lot of work here. Yeah. Brian O'Sullivan says, maybe the title in this one could do a little more to situate the speaker. A Buddhist convert reconsiders, or something like that. That could help us understanding why the Buddhism is inconsistent. Yeah, exactly. Rose says, the kitchen timer doesn't relate to anything in the poem, suddenly domestic. And that's a really good point, too. Like, we brought in this, the bed, which is sort of metaphorical, the hard bed in a strange town, but also possibly literal. And so it's one of those doing work of both. So we're in a bedroom setting. You might expect, instead of a kitchen timer and alarm clock, near the bed would make more sense. But we get a little ungrounded toward the end. That's what I was trying to explain before. Let's see. Yeah, and as Dry Amontillado says, it feels like the poem is referencing Buddhism rather than actually using Buddhism to interpret the world or as a guide for living. And yeah, that's the kind of thing that I'm trying to get at. It doesn't feel like it's coherent within it. It feels like, it's like overheard some principles. It like heard the first, three noble truths. Is it 3? I think there were always 3, right? Or is it 7? Or is it 5? I don't know. I don't remember. It's been like 20 years. But it's like we sort of heard the noble truths, and then we're meditating on that without really understanding them. And so I'm just not sure how to place that within a kind of coherent view of the universe, I guess is the way to put it. Like, I'd like to hear more about the speaker's actual beliefs and how they're situated, if that makes sense. 4 noble truths, says Dry Amontillado. Thank you. Yeah, it's been a while. They have a lot of lists in Buddhism. I remember that. So anyway, okay, that's my thoughts on that poem. That's everybody's thoughts. I got a lot more comments. Great comments here through. Andy Blanchard says, "Nu what" is Yiddish for so what. So we're mixing a lot of things. Yeah, Deb T says this is interesting. I agree that the theology seems mixed up, and I'm wondering if this is a trustworthy speaker, if it's purposefully contradictory. And that's the thing, if we got to know the speaker a little more using like Brian O'Sullivan's suggestion, that might help reconcile that by the end. I mean, you don't want to know where, you don't want to like not know where to put things by the end of the poem. It's kind of like, even if you don't know what the purpose is for, like there's a place for this, and there was a reason that was there, and then you sort of feel happy to meditate on it. But there's a lot of stuff in this poem where I don't really know where to put or what to do with, and it just feels sort of cluttered in a way that there's a lot of like little threads that are unresolved. And I think the poem would be more successful if we had more, either less clutter, less threads, and a more focused thing, or more resolution to each of those. And so the way that these things interact, why there's Yiddish, why there's French, why there's Buddhism, why there's like a Christian conception at the very end, all those things, if we knew where the person was and what was actually going on in the speaker, we might be able to resolve those threads. They wouldn't be hanging and dangling and confusing us as much. Yeah. Okay. As Rose says, this is a good point too, and maybe she says this every time, but Rose says to Mark, she says, because we have to type fast, the comments may come across more abrupt than intended. Yeah, I mean, everybody's just really trying to help everyone out here. That's what we're always doing. Nobody means to be mean with any comments. Just we're trying to explain things and get comments out and things like that. So please take everything with a good nature that it was intended. Not for this in particular, but just forever. It's a good reminder. Katie says, write what you know, but in lieu of that, write what you have spent a lot of time on Wikipedia learning about. That's good advice, too. Okay. Yeah. Gary Rosen says, a lot of this seems pulled from the junk drawer of a spiritual pilgrim. I love that concept. And what if that was like the title? Like fishing through the junk drawer of a spiritual pilgrim. I think that'd be a cool title for a poem. Yeah. Okay. So anyway. Okay. Well, that's going to wrap up this one. Hope this is helpful, Mark. And, really interesting poems, too. A lot to dissect here. Because both poems are sort of interesting. Like a lot of times, if you watch other ones, I'm not sure how often you've attended these, Mark, but a lot of times there's like not really much to talk about. Like it's like, what was the purpose of this poem, and who is saying what, and where are we, and what are you even trying to say is a common theme. And these poems have a lot of stuff to talk about, which is why we've been talking about them a lot. Okay. All right. So, yeah. Let's move on to the next poet. And next up is Rachal Valenzuela, who has been participating a lot lately. A pretty newcomer to doing all the stuff that we do here at Rattle. But I recognize that name because she's been very active lately, and I wanted to get to these poems quickly. So let's take a look. And Rachal, first, before we jump to that, let me find, where's her? She had an interesting question, too. Because there's a spot, I should say, for general questions on the critique when you submit, if you have anything you want to know about in particular for me to talk about. And this is one I've never heard before. How do you convey inflection in writing? So that's a general question. And that's what I would say. Well, I assume, first of all, you mean like intonation and like stress and things like that within the lines. Inflection has a grammatical definition, too, which is like the sort of the conjugation of like adjectives and stuff like that, like taller, tallest, that kind of thing. I assume you don't mean that kind of inflection, which is what makes Latin. I remember I audited Latin in college, trying to learn Latin, and gosh, the inflections are hard because everything is inflected. Anyway, but I assume you mean like the stress and the intonation, and that would be why it's much more difficult. And I haven't looked at the poems yet, so I'm not sure, but using punctuation in line breaks strategically are really how you sort of establish that voice. And when we hear the actual voice of the poet, when we hear that in our head, which is the goal of what we should be trying to do, then we come to the right inflections on their own. Because we hear that voice, we know how the speaker, there's this way, and I'm not sure how it actually works. It might have to do with mirror neurons and adapting to it, but we're like becoming the speaker in a really interesting way. And then we know how the speaker would say it. The same way a method actor is becoming the character, and then you're like spontaneously reacting. You're spontaneously like feeling in a good poem the voice and the way that the lines are inflected and where the emphases are. And so that's really why developing a voice. And oftentimes I say the most important thing when you're thinking about voice is thinking about an actual person. It can be anybody or anything, speaking to another actual person. And that last poem by Mark, that actual person was a speaker, sort of disembodied, monologue-y type speaker, speaking to us, a reader, but we knew that. So we knew that it was someone speaking to us. Other times it can be like me, the poet, I'm speaking to my mom, or I'm talking to Katie in my head, or I'm talking to... it's like I'm imagining God speaking to an ant or whatever it is, something like that. It can be as creative or strange as you want. But if you have a sense of that, a lot of the stuff spontaneously comes out that signify voice. And then it's when you don't have a sense in yourself as you're writing of who is speaking to who. That's when the voice is sort of incoherent and you don't have a sense of that inflection and things like that. So that's what I would say, and that's what punctuation is for, is the other thing I would say. So having, commas and dashes and exclamation points and question marks, those are all tools to help you hear the inflection and hear how these different versions of words are supposed to come across, because it's a very different thing if it's a question structure and the way that your tone rises and then falls, or other way around, falls and rises, than if it's not. And you can say... you can say things in different ways. And so there's little cues, which is what really punctuation is, to help you know how to read the sound of the words of the sentence. So anyway, after all that's said, yeah. Okay, so let's read the poem. So first one is Indulge Me. I gotta switch to Rachel's. This one? Yeah. Okay, Indulge Me. So a short poem here. It's just that. Like, 10 lines or something. Indulge me. Misled and fed on beautiful lies, a mouthful so divine, I devour each and every course, lick the remnants from my fork, every assertion I swallow whole, an incoalescence in my throat, lying down, a lonely spoon, nothing left to be consumed, staring at an empty plate, this newfound weight, truth became an empty space. Yeah, so interesting here. Indulge me. And some nice lines and nice sounds in this poem. Indulge me, I feel a little bit left out with a title like this because I don't know who... it sort of implies a you. It's like one of those statements that's like, you indulge me is what it's really saying, and it's truncating that. So it makes me wonder who the you is, and we don't get that resolved. And it's sort of setting me up to not have it resolved either. It feels like it's not. So I think the title, one of the things we can work on is a better title that gives us more situation, more context. But indulge me. Misled and fed, and so we get a really nice rhyme, and people are mentioning the nice rhyme sounds a lot, and they're nice, and they're not just straight rhymes. They're internal rhymes within sentences, not line, and there's slant rhyme too, which makes the whole thing, as Nancy Janelle says, it has a graceful lilt to it. Exactly, yeah. So there's nice sounds in this poem. It's fun to read out loud. Misled and fed on beautiful lies. Excuse me, 1 second. I think still have from that COVID or whatever from last week or 2 weeks ago or however long that was. I still have this lingering urge to cough. It's psychosomatic almost. Anyway, misled and fed on beautiful lies, a mouth so divine, I devour each and every course, lick the remnants from my fork. So see, that's a nice slant rhyme there, course and fork. Every assertion I swallow whole. So I'm just still lost about who. Yeah, so everybody's saying interesting turns of phrase and love the sounds. Yeah. And exactly, I'm waiting for someone to say this. Dick Westheimer came through. Dick says, this might be a poem that would come alive with a long expositional title, which is still musical. Yeah. And that's the thing. So, indulge me. Like who is doing as we were talking about in the very beginning poem, if there's not a connection to who we're speaking to, it's hard to have a real emotional connection. Like if we don't know who's who and have a sense of character, it's the same kind of thing. One death is a tragedy, a million is a statistic. If we have a personal connection, even if it's just tenuous sort of fake artificial connection, it still works to help us have more emotion, to sort of have a sense of who is who. And we don't have that with the me. Who is indulging me? And so Bethany Jermel says, indulge me, lover. That would be very helpful. Dick says, it feels like this is a poem that's an extended metaphor for some bigger, or not really bigger, but more real world specific situation. And what Dick said, I think having that be in the title would help us situate us in the poem, and then let's just enjoy the music and feel the experience of it. So some kind of title that helps tell the story. And I think, we talked about how sometimes it's better to, have the story evolve in the poem. But yeah, Linda McCrary Bowerman says, what is the deeper story? That's what I want to know here. And I think we could get away, because there's such music and it's such a tight little lyric poem, we could get away with just knowing the deeper story and then having this be a metaphor within it. We talked recently, I think, about Divorce, the poem by Jose Alcantara. Jose A. Alcantara. Yeah. Anyway, Jose's poem "Divorce," which won the Neil Postman Award for Metaphor not too long ago. We talked about that, how that knowing that it was about divorce, even though divorce was never mentioned in the poem, makes the poem come to life as an extended metaphor, and you need that title. It's the same kind of situation here. If we knew some of the situation, and it might not be as simple. Was that just last week we were talking about that? It might have been. But if we have a sense of the story, not within this metaphor, but sort of just by itself, with a long, nice title that kind of explained it, then we could really appreciate the poem more. Debs, says, the story I'm getting is someone misled by lovely lies and swallowing them, then realizing the words are empty. And that I think that's a good explanation of that. I think that's sort of my sense of it too. But we shouldn't be playing the game of guessing at it. Like, what you're trying to make us do is have an experience and feel, like feel along with you, have that emotion too, not try to figure out what you're talking about. Like, it's not a puzzle. A poem isn't a puzzle. And so what we want to do here, I think, is have an explanation, like Dick said, to know what the story's about, and then have this, let this be an extended metaphor to understand that situation better. Okay. So Winston Munn says, for a title, "Why do I always believe my ex-husbands?" That's a great, a title like that. I don't know what the situation is. We can only guess, but we don't want to have to guess. But, something like that would be a title that makes the poem come alive. Okay. Misled and fed on beautiful lies, a mouthful so divine, I devour each and every course, lick the remnants from my fork, every assertion I swallow whole, an incoalescence in my throat. Incoalescence, that means that's like the heartwarming, right? Isn't that what that means? That's not a word I've seen very often. A growing, just not heart specifically, just a growing warm kind of, or ardent feeling. Okay, so a warm feeling, an incoalescence in my throat, lying down, a lonely spoon, nothing left to be consumed, staring at an empty plate. This newfound weight, truth, became an empty space. So to me, I think, as well, I think this last line is the weakest line in the poem, because it's sort of a summarizing. It's like, I think we get the metaphor. We don't need any extra help to understand the metaphor, but it's sort of it's an explanation that's sort of helping us understand it. And I think this newfound weight is a much better ending. The weight of an empty plate, and there's that nice rhyme there too. But we can sort of meditate and think on that. I think that's a stronger way to end and let us think. And if we knew what the situation was in the title, I think it would all sort of add up in a really pleasurable, connecting, empathetic way. So I think so fix the title and then cut the last line is my suggestion for this poem. And I'm going to see if there's anything else we want to talk about here. Leela Holmes says, I disagree that poems aren't puzzles. Not all of them, but some poems are meant to be unlocked, meant to games. They need to be fair puzzles, like a golden age mystery. Give me all the clues. I don't really know about that. I mean, there's elements of a poem that are successful even before the puzzle is unlocked in those. And in a poem like that, where there are elements that are deeper and you can enjoy the poem more, the more you dig into the meaning of that, it's never that there's nothing on the surface that doesn't work. It's that the puzzle makes the poem deeper and expand with meaning, and it's more interesting that there's all these layers to it. But I don't know. I mean, find me a poem. I mean, that's like a riddle, or like that doesn't make sense, and then it does. I don't think that's a. It's because a poem is an experience. Like, we have this whole. It's not just tradition. It's evolutionary biology that we're listening to stories. We're empathizing with people through what they say. We're imagining ourselves in other people's shoes. They're inhabiting our breath with poems, and then and you lose all that if it's totally confusing and it's like a riddle. A riddle doesn't work, and so it's different. Like if you read I mean, a great example is like T.S. Eliot, of course. If you look at like The Wasteland, there's like 1,000 footnotes, but there's still the energy of the speaker, and you kind of know where you are. You're moving around this space. You're seeing a lot of tangible things. All that stuff works, even if you don't unlock the riddles of who, like whoever Tiberius is or whoever the hell's all over that. Maria Burke says, Ada Limon, Sharks in the Rivers. Let's see. I'm curious about that. If I can pull this up, we'll read it if it's not too long. Sharks in the Rivers. Well, is this too long to do? Let's see what time we got. Well, why not? Let's look at this poem. And I think... Let's see. So Rachel Valenzuela says, I meant for it to be an exploration of the indulgence of the lies we tell ourselves and the white lies we seek. So that's interesting. Yeah. Barb Christian says there's no place for a slightly ambiguous poem where the reader is given space to bring their own story to the page. No, I mean, there definitely is. But there has to be, it's sort of one element. It can't be the whole thing, or else people won't want to bring it to the whole own, you know? They won't want to sit with it and bring their own thing to it. It just doesn't really work that way. It'd be nice if it did. I mean, we'd sort of have more freedom to do it, but it just doesn't work. It doesn't engage people. And I don't think, well, if I want to see this poem now, let's look at Sharks in the Rivers. And I'm not sure why whoever mentioned it did, but we'll take a look at it. Let's see. And this is courtesy of the American Academy of Poets. Sharks in the Rivers. We'll say unbelievable things to each other in the early morning. Our blue coming up from our roots, our water rising in our extraordinary limbs. So I gotta move this a little bit. All night I dreamt of bonfires and burn piles and ghosts of men and spirits behind those birds of flame. I cannot tell anyone when a door opens or closes. I can only hear the frame saying, walk through. It is a short walkway into another bedroom. Consider the handle, consider the key. I say to a friend how scared I am of sharks, how I thought I saw them in the creek, across from my street. I once watched for them, holding a bundle of rattlesnake grass in my hand, shaking like I was a weak-leaf girl. She sends me an article from a recent National Geographic that says sharks bite fewer people each year than New Yorkers do, according to Health Department records. Then she sends me on my way into the city of sharks. Through another doorway, I walk to the East River saying, sharks are people too, sharks are people too, sharks are people too. I write all the things I need on the bottom of my tennis shoes. I say, let's walk together. The sun behind me is like a fire, tiny flames in the river's ripples. I say something to God, but he's not a living thing. So I say to the river, I say, I want to walk through this doorway, but without all those ghosts on the edge. I want them to stay here. I want them to go on without me. I want them to burn in the water. So that is Sharks in the Rivers by Ada Limon. And so I'm curious, what seems... I mean, there are elements of that poem that are sort of harder to follow, that are abstractions and pushing in different directions. But we know sort of the general topic. We know we're talking about sharks and rivers. We know that's a metaphor for the dangerous nature of human beings. There's elements that are sort of unclear, and we can sort of read and dig deeper in, but that's what I was talking about. There's ways that we can unlock the poem to get richer and richer meanings out of it. But how are we lost with respect to what she's saying? Maybe there's something that I'm not seeing. I'm kind of curious what your thoughts are about this. Let's see. Yeah. Anyway. Yeah, do you see what I mean? I'm wondering. I'm not following how that. There's a lot of things. There's a lot of concrete stuff in that poem. You know, sharks in the rivers, and we know we get to that story about how sharks bite people fewer. That whole shark angle is like a layer on top of it too. It's like a filter through which to analyze the rest of the stuff in the poem. And we kind of know that in the poem. I've never read this poem before, by the way. Sharks in the rivers will say unbelievable things to each other in the early morning. Our blue coming up from our roots, our water rising in our extraordinary limbs. So then, you know, remember when we were talking about that bed and where that, or the kitchen timer at the end didn't really fit within the poem. Notice how these descriptions are sort of sharkish descriptions for the people, even though they don't mention it. You know, our blue coming up from our roots, our water rising in our extraordinary limbs. Like, so we have the blue, we have the water, even the limbs and fins is a kind of sort of a echo there. All night I dreamt of bonfires and burn piles and ghosts of men and spirits behind those birds of flame. And so we talk about last night's dream. I cannot tell any more when a door opens or closes. I can only hear the frame saying walk through. And there's an abstraction, but we're so grounded in the poem already. We woke up in the morning after this, dream of the bonfire and the ghosts and things like that. Some unnerving type dream. It is a short walkway into another bedroom. And then we know through a metaphor that that's talking about relationships. Consider the handle, consider the key. I say to a friend how scared I am of sharks. And then we have that thing which feels like a tangent, but we know from the title that we're getting there. To see this is all, even though it's abstract, this is such an important point that's so hard to explain. And so we talk about this often. This is a great poem to look at. We know where we are in the poem. We have a sense of who the speaker is and like what they're talking about, even as they go abstract. And that's why abstractions can work, but we can't have just the abstraction. We have to have that sense of where we are in the poem so we can connect with it and be driven to explore where those abstractions take us and what that, what the handle and the key here might be. We're invested in the poem because we have a sense of somebody waking up in the morning and in these relationships and the structure that's going on. We're connected to that. The scene has flourished. And so now we want to explore. We're like engaged. We've been invited into this universe. And now we want to see like why we've been called here. And so we're really interested in things like consider the handle, consider the key. But imagine if the poem was called, indulge me. And then it says, consider the handle, consider the key. I say to my friend, how scared I am of sharks. We're like, what's going on here? But we have a sense of what's going on. And so then it allows us to engage with all that stuff. Anyway, I don't know if I want to keep going on this poem, but you can see, I don't know. So I'm curious. This is given time for if there's some kind of mystery to unlock here or something that I'm missing, you can let me know. We've only done the first poem by Rachel too. We gotta move on. Sorry. That was fun to look at though. As Linda McGuire Bowerman says, she knows how to hold the reader. Yeah. Beth Jerome says perhaps it's a puzzle because of different things come together. It's a braiding of things, so it has layers. It asks the reader to hold all the things together and consider the meaning. Yeah, and you can look at something like there's a that Jane Hirschfield style. We talked about on her episode. We talked about her essays of the Rattlecast. And that's a way of like taking a thing and breaking it apart and all the things, and holding it together. The other thing, David Kirby on that episode talks about his braids. And it's that kind of thing and seeing how these things connect. But you're always grounded. You know the situation, and so you can connect. Okay. Yeah. Okay, so anyway, let's move on to the next poem. So this poem, to me, we'll just say it one more time. Oops, let's see. There we go. I think here it's a really nice musical poem. A poet to look at is the master of these short musical poems, is Kay Ryan. Look at how she does things and how she handles the rhyme and sort of buries them and plays with them. Wendy Vidalock is a great poet, too, to look at for this type of poem. Although she does a lot more repetition very often, and Kay is a little more sort of free verse with her rhymes. But check out poets like that, like Kay Ryan. Get her books and see how she does it. So I just cut this last line to let the power of this line. I think it's a great last line. This newfound weight. I mean, that leaves you open and wants you It asks you to think about what that means. And I think that's a really powerful way to end a poem. And so I think that's a great ending. And then just make sure, let us in with a title. Let's take a look at the other one. Another short poem. Wait, is there another poem? Oh, I went to the second poem first. Okay, anyway. This is Forgotten Melodies, again, by Rachal Valenzuela. Forgotten Melodies. A siren's call I've forgotten for so many times before. Sunlight weaves her tapestry. She's diligent in reminding me the promise in a sparrow's song. As if she rings for me alone, coaxing me to come along. But I have no wings, I cannot sing, I cannot weave, I only dream when darkness falls, and in the comfort of my morn, I'll forget my dreams once more. Yeah, so that's interesting. Yeah, 1 second again. Okay. Yeah. About the last thing, this is a nice comment from Chelsea McClellan. She says, a poem can be a puzzle as long as it comes with a box with a picture. You're made more intimate with each detail as you put it together, but there was some sort of clear picture to work off. And that's a good way to put it. It is. Okay. Forgotten Melodies. Again, I think the titles, for both these, the titles are a weakness. Get some kind of title. One thing I didn't mention with this title, too, Indulge Me. It's not what you want to do. There are a few things, you want a title to serve a function. And there's a lot of different ways a title can function. And you can kind of want to get as many of those ways as possible. But one of those things you want to do is make the person interested in reading the poem. Like, think about looking at a table of contents and looking at the different titles. Would this title make me want to read this poem? I mean, that's a really good question. And Indulge Me is sort of bland and doesn't stimulate anything. It doesn't make me think. And then Forgotten Melodies is sort of an abstract and sort of, close to cliche type. It doesn't really add a whole lot. It doesn't make me curious. So it's not providing that function. And then the other big thing it can do, of two things it can do, one of the other things it can do are, it can make you curious. It can explain some things that are not explained, so help situate you within the poem, or it can add to your understanding of the poem. And I think the best titles in the world are the ones that do all three. But you want to get two, or at least one, if not two or three of those kind of things in there. And the title, so it's functioning, and it's the same as a single line. Every line should be pushing the poem forward, adding to the experience. The title is an even more important line, and it should be adding to the experience. Here, yeah. So get the title more interesting. Let's see. Forgotten Melodies. A siren's call I've fallen for so many times before. Sunlight weaves her tapestry. She's diligent in reminding me the promise in a sparrow's song. So I like the, again, we have some nice music. Yeah. Let's see. I'm just looking at some of the comments. Anyway. A siren's call, and I think, there should be an apostrophe here. A siren's call I've fallen for so many times before. And again, so I'm wondering what the siren's call is. I think I saw some people saying that. Margarita says the jump to sparrows seems to leave something out. So a siren's call I've fallen for so many times before. Sunlight weaves her tapestry. She's diligent in reminding me the promise in a sparrow's song. As if she sings for me alone, coaxing me to come along. But I have no wings, I cannot sing, I cannot weave, I only dream. When darkness falls and in comfort of the morn, I'll forget my dreams once more. One of the things, the morn, it's an archaic use, and we would too want to have apostrophe is there for letters that are left out. So we know letters are left out. If we want an apostrophe there, it's an archaic kind of use of morn, like cutting off, dropping that participle at the end. It's something that you see in older poems, but it feels archaic to do because we don't do that very often. And it's done here, interestingly, in a very free poem, even though there's a lot of internal rhyme. It's done for the for the rhyme here. It just throws me out of the poem a little bit. So I would not do the mourn. I would try to find some other way to work with that. Jamie Thomas says, I'm missing the originality of the turns of phrases from the first one. Linda McCrary Browerman says, the promise in a sparrow song reads like a beautiful title for a poem. And it does too. That's my favorite part. So let's try to break down the poem a little more. A siren's call I've fallen for so many times before. I think to me this is like a little wordy. It feels like there's a more condensed way to say that, but I'm not really quite. And maybe that becomes the title. Like the title is something about the siren's call. Then we can jump in. As Mark Grenier said, there's a leap to sparrows that doesn't really make sense. And we could leap to there from the title, then it kind of would feel a little better. Yeah. Yeah, another suggestion. Where did it go? Sorry, it jumped on me. Cinder Fee says, what if the promise in a sparrow's song were the title and then the poem started with as if she sings? I think that would be nice. That would be nice. Yeah, so anyway, I'm not really sure how to connect this. So, a siren's call I've fallen for so many times before. Sunlight weaves her tapestry. She's diligent in reminding me the promise in a sparrow's song. So the siren is reminding of the promise of a sparrow's song. As if she sings for me alone. And that would be the siren still singing, right? Coaxing me to come along. But I have no wings, I cannot sing. I cannot weave, I only dream when darkness falls. In the comfort of the morn, I'll forget my dreams once more. So I have trouble following the thread of this poem. So who is coaxing me? Because, sparrows, I assume, weaving a nest. Is a siren weaving a nest? Yeah. Yeah, again, similar, being situated with a title would help. PMB says sparrow traditionally represents community and cooperation. Yeah, so it leaves me wondering what the siren's call is. Again, it feels in a similar structure to the other poem, where this was a metaphor, talking about the lies we tell ourselves. This seems like it's talking about something else. It feels like it's symbolic, but we don't know what it's for. So what is the siren's call? So if we had that as the title, then we'd feel more situated within the poem. We'd know what's going on, but we really don't know what the siren's call is. Let's see. Grace Atlas says there are so many metaphors in this poem. Siren's call, sunlight's tapestry, sparrow's song. I'm not sure what's going on within the poem. Yeah, I just get a little lost within it. It doesn't have. There's some really fresh lines in the other poem that are unusual. A lonely spoon, the incalescence. You don't see that word much, but musically it fits actually pretty well. Especially assertion kind of sets it up. I never mentioned that, but having that kind of long word and then you get that, and there's a nice sound to it too. The fork. There's interesting things here, and then the weight. The weight of the empty plate is interesting too. This doesn't have that sort of freshness to the imagery, and there were sort of two things that were propelling the poem and making the last poem work with those slight modifications is that it had a lot of newness in what it was saying and a lot of music. This has some music, but there's some forced music. It feels, the more and more kind of feels forced for the internal rhyme, and the falls felt like it was drawn in from something else too. I can't remember where that was, but. And then there's the sing wings. It feels like it's not really having as much to say, but pushing it through, letting the music generate stuff, sort of filler and not really finding itself. So I think this poem is sort of in search of itself a little more. And I think it's more digging into what the heart of the poem really is. And I think the promise in a sparrow song is a nice concept. I think that feels like the center of it. And maybe that's the thing to focus on more. Like, what does that really mean? Yeah. Let's see. Katie Dozier says, I feel there's a great emotion here, which is wonderful, but I want to journey into hearing the unique melodies that were forgotten. That's a great place to go too. And Mark Grenier says the siren at the beginning seems to recall the sirens of Odessa, thus dangerous. And yeah, that's the assumption of me. I mean, the sirens, isn't that the story, is that the sirens are calling you into crashing your ship. It's like an inverse lighthouse, So so that is when I see a siren's call, that's, to me, that's where my mind goes, but I'm not sure how that connects with the rest. I mean, I would go and have this shipwreck, but I don't have the wings, I can't sing, I can't weave, I can't even follow to crash. So I'm not really sure how that fits together. Amy Dower Solorzano says, might be nice to browse some of the abades on the Poetry Foundation website. The morning is subject matter that always calls to poets, so it's nice to explore how to make it really fresh. That's a good point. Yeah. So anyway, so this was one to develop more. There's definitely, as Katie Doder says, there's an emotion behind this. You can feel it there, but we don't really know where to put it or what to do with it. Feels like the heart to me is the promise in a sparrow's song, and what that draws you to do is kind of like what you're trying to explore, but we only like scratch the surface of it, and not in sort of new and creative ways, really. And so I think it's like the very impetus for a poem here. It's like the start of a poem, but like explore that is the thoughts here. Okay, well, we are 18 minutes past the hour, so we got to wrap it up. Let's see. Here we go. Well, let's wrap it up. So, it was really fun. Thanks to Rachel Valenzuela for this, and also Mark Fishbane. Really interesting poems to look at. A lot of great qualities in each. We kind of push a little harder than we normally do because that's what we do when we're better poets. So fun to see that. Thanks for sharing, and thanks for all of your comments. If you haven't clicked the like button yet, please do. Although we got a lot of likes. So the like to viewer ratio is really high, so thank you for that. That really does help a lot. And let's see. So this week coming up on the Rattlecast, the guest is going to be Shira Hammonds. And Shira, she's a real strong veteran of Poet Response. She's been in Poet Response a whole bunch. We published her a few times, including the most recent issue. She's a poet who she loves horses and takes care of a lot of horses, a lot of rescue horses, I believe. She also writes about chronic injury in her book Maps of Injury. And other things too. She's from North Texas, so writes about that. We're going to have a North Texas poem, equestrian type themes, and chronic illness as well. Interesting books by Shira Hammonds, great poet. Rattlecast 254. The prompt for this week was to write a journalistic poem. I always have to look it up to make sure I get the wording right. Write a journalistic poem. Oh, come on. There we go. Write a journalistic poem that explores the sensory details of where you live. So interestingly, we were reading Shira Hammond's book last night. Not this one, but the other one. What was it called? Traveler's Guide to Bomb City. And the first poem she has there is exactly this prompt, which is kind of funny. She's going to read it tomorrow. Had no idea, or maybe she did know, that was the prompt for this week. But write a journalistic poem that explores the sensory details of where you live. She's got one on North Texas. Let's see what you got. It's always fun to see where people live, get a sense of that. That'll be really fun on the prompt lines. Shira Hammond is the guest. Rattlecast 254, Sunday, July 21st, regular time, 8 p.m. Eastern, 5 p.m. Pacific. Hope to see you there. Hope you have a great weekend in the meantime, and we'll talk to you later. Bye. Oh yeah, and Katie reminds me, there's a new episode of the Poetry Space out where we talk about alternative publishing. So that's a lot of fun. Check that out. Just go to